pentagram dedicated to Henry Foreman. In the years of the primal force and the dawn of terrestrial birth, man mastered the mammoth and horde. Man was the
Good evening, my friends. Good afternoon, good morning, who knows? Welcome to Agitators Anonymous. I am Alan Averill. Can someone please tell Danzig to get back together with John Christ and Chuck Biscuits and Eerie Vaughan, or at least get a drummer who can play. Glenn, please stop releasing these singles where it sounds like you're playing all the instruments. Then again, this is kind of a problem, isn't it? And it's curious, the case of Danzig, because you have the first four albums are some of the most exceptional rock albums ever made. Been listening to them non-stop once again every year, a couple of times a year. I just binge on those first four albums and they are utterly incredible. And the drop-off is so staggering. Has there been a more staggering drop-off in the history of rock, metal? I mean, answers on a postcard, please. But this is what happens, and it's happened to Iron Maiden, it's happened to lots of bands. It happens to... And it's partly what I'm going to get into now, which is a bit about technology, a bit about AI, a bit about Spotify and all that kind of stuff. But I'll waffle a bit before that, a bit about heavy metal, because a new song came up in my Spotify playlist, curated for me. New releases by artists you love came up. And I played the new Danzig single this morning, and I thought, we really do. Rock metal needs to be made in a room with other people. You can't just sit there in front of a computer and trade files and program the drums and, well, Glenn, come on. You know what to do. You've done it with the Misfits. Let's just, get a drummer back in the room. Can also, before I get into this Spotify discussion, because I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to talk about today, and then a piece of news just hit me and I thought, wow, this has really interesting implications for the music industry. So no, today's podcast is not going to be about politics, and not going to be about any of those other stuff. Well, I suppose the politics of the music industry, and I suppose the politics of art and creation versus prompting. Yep. Anyway, did you see Jane's Addiction melting down on stage? Perry Farrell, oh Perry. An insufferable See You Next Tuesday, who I happened to watch an episode of some awful Rock Wives program, and this man just seemed to embody everything about the sort of California hippie that I detest most in the world. But clearly, there's a moment comes where you have to go, you know what, maybe I'll stay off the powder, I'll stay off the booze. And when you're 60 odd, it catches up to you. And Jane's Addiction, who I have no time for whatsoever. But I had lots of friends who liked them, who were looking forward to try and see them again. And he has a complete meltdown, tries to punch that Dave Navarro guy, who was all over the celebrity gossip news 15, 20, 25 years ago. How it must feel to slowly be moving off the radar till you're not relevant anymore after such heights of fame. It can really fuck up the brain, and certainly Mr. Farrell looks like he's been doing quite a lot of fucking up of the brain. But this has happened to many of those grunge frontmen, hasn't it? Lane Staley, amongst others, Chris Cornell, whoever else, Chad Kroeger, Kurt Cobain. Yeah, sounds the same, doesn't it, really? But I do love the rock wife coming out and saying, oh no, he had tinnitus, he couldn't hear on stage, he couldn't... Look, come on lady, you can't bullshit an audience full of middle-aged bullshitters who can see clearly what's happening. Anyway, hopefully I'll be dead before this happens to me. Or at the very least, retired somewhere in the mountains in some medieval village. I'll have taken up artisan cheese making. I'll have become a cheesemonger, turned my back on all the other kinds of monger, ironmonger, warmonger, fishmonger. War and fish, yeah, it's an odd thing to mung. However, anyway, cheesemonger, that's what I'll be. Some would say I have been for 30 odd years, listening to my musical output. Anyway, what am I going to talk about today? Basically, it's the division between being a prompter and a creator. Because a story popped up in my feed and I just couldn't help sort of digging into it. And it's about this guy called Michael Smith. Now, he's somewhere in America, some state in America, I forget which one. basically what this clever clogs had done, or rather greedy clever clogs. I think if you're going to be a clever clogs, you can't try and defraud the system of 10 million. But he's found a loophole in the system, and it's a loophole that's going to get bigger and more complicated to close as we move ahead. And it's in relation to AI-generated songwriting and Spotify. What this man did was basically create hundreds of thousands of songs, of AI songs, and new artists, and get them on playlists. And then had bots listen to them. So, in theory, he generated a huge, they say $10 million, but which seems ridiculous. If you're going to try and, steal money from Spotify, well, not steal money from Spotify, but game the system, maybe do it for 100,000 and see if that works first. $100,000. So what he's done, and this is something I've been seeing an awful lot of. I don't know about you, but when I go to my Spotify playlist, there's one specific kind of black metal where every third, fourth, fifth song now sounds like an AI generated song, and this is the lo-fi sort of Under a Funeral Moon style black metal. Death metal seems a bit more difficult for the Suno, whatever it is, to register properly. Less so thrash metal, whatever this kind of, maybe it's because bedroom black metal has always been a thing, and the sort of one-man black metal thing has always been, you don't really have one-man death metal. But the black metal, unfortunately, and some element of black metal, this sort of keyboard-driven, more sort of, super lo-fi, distant black metal, is something that's always appealed to one person sitting in their bedroom. And now I think they can prompt it very, very easily. I'm starting to see lots of songs popping up where I go, is this a new band from the Ukraine? Or is this one person just prompting this to sound like 1992 or 1995 black metal? One band, I don't even know the name of, something ridiculous, and it was all these super lo-fi black metal covers of 90s pop songs, obviously aimed at a certain generation who maybe grew up with pop and then moved into black metal, and also appeals to the most despicable thing in modern heavy metal, which is our praising of novelty. And look, a joke in music is possibly funny one time. Other than that, never. Keep your humour to other things, but certainly don't pollute the metal scene with it. But that's what resonates with many people, and that is this. You can see it reflected in some of these AI prompts. Please generate me a Britney Spears cover in the style, an instrumental style of early 90s Norwegian black metal, is something you could do, and it would generate that cover for you in a minute. So what this guy Michael Smith has done is he's basically spent a couple of weeks of man hours. Actually, probably not if he's just using AI. AI can churn out these songs within seconds. And he's just he's tried to game the system by just prompting hundreds of thousands of songs. And look, he got caught. And the irony is that, according to the story, he's looking at several decades in prison. When, if you remember my podcast from about a month and a half ago, I discussed this artist that no one had ever heard of, who was basically, it would seem to me, a Spotify prompted creation. And his songs were seeded in playlists, very popular playlists, every third or fourth song, so that essentially Spotify would be, to ultimate intents and purposes, paying itself. Like a sort of employee working behind the doors, behind the gates. So this guy is kind of doing something similar, but obviously he's outside the system, and the system is going to come down hard on him. Now, of course, the moral question and the moral quandary is, wow, how quickly the federal system came down on this guy who managed to figure out a way of how to game the system. And I think an awful lot of people are thinking about this lately, because there is a system there to be gamed. And I'll get into a bit more detail in a moment. But no one has ever hauled Spotify over the coals and gone, well, your payment system is fraudulent, or your payment system is immoral, or you're not paying any artists, or you have the sliding scale percentage rule that really just pays all of these huge major artists and nobody else gets a thing? Or can you allow bands to access their monthly listeners so they can maybe promote their shows or promote them merch or whatever? Because when you do buy merch or CDs from Spotify, that's not the bands putting that up there. That is a third party company, and through which bands generally have nothing to do with. I removed it on the Primordial Spotify, but many bands don't, and many bands don't even realize that it's there. But Lee realized this. That has nothing to do with the band. So anyway, this guy Michael Smith, he programs ChatGPT to endlessly create these songs with Suno, the artificial song manufacturing system. Now, most people don't realize this, but to upload songs onto Spotify, you need to go through CD Baby or TuneCore, among others. These are third-party platform uploaders to Spotify. You can't just dump a song up to Spotify. And an album costs about $30, $40, $49 or whatever it is dollars a year. So it's a calculated risk. Well, not a risk. It's a calculated earner for Spotify, because these are the ones who own these companies, that your streams will never amount to repay the amount that you are paying to upload your album. Because let's be honest, hundreds of thousands of new songs are up every week. Most people don't listen to any of them. So this guy Michael Smith thought to himself, well, I could just use AI to generate the music, and then I could just upload it with all of these different names and just see how much shit hits the wall. And those songs maybe have to only be 60 or 90 seconds long. They don't have to be that long. And he got caught. But imagine there was 1 million Michael Smiths, all looking for 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 or small earners. How is the system ever going to regulate that? Because, and this is something has happened to me. I remember in the Post 25 years ago, somebody sent me, as they thought it was funny, there was a rapper called Primordial. And it was just some guy in the Deep South making these lo-fi raps. And his cover of his CD, it was all pretty lo-fi to say the least. Some black dude from the Deep South. And somebody just sent me the CD via, I suppose it would have been eBay or something as a joke. And it was pretty funny. But then his album started to get put on our Spotify, and I had to write to Spotify and get them removed. And every now and again, as it happened maybe only 2 years ago, there was a kind of smooth jazz thing that was up called Primordial. And there are a few other Primordials, and it takes Spotify a while to see that, oh, that's not the same band. You've probably seen this before when you go into Spotify and you've gone, oh, there's a new, I don't know, pick a name. I look over my shoulder and I go, oh, there's a new Pentagram. Well, actually, I can see a Pentagram record on the floor here. Well, don't worry, not on the floor, but, in its place. Pentagram is a good example because there's a Pentagram from Turkey who used to be called Mizarkabul, I think. They have an album called Anatolia, which is sort of Eastern-sounding heavy metal. They tried, I think, to become big in Central Media, but it didn't really work 20 years ago. There's a few other Pentagrams. There's Pentagram Chile in brackets. Now, what if Spotify was to couple them all together, which it probably did in the beginning? You could see the problem. Now, what if you, an unscrupulous prompter, not a creator, because let's be fair, let's be clear here now. If you are just prompting music with Spotify, then you're a prompter. You're not actually creating anything. It's the AI that is doing the, and I put this in parenthesis, creation, but it's not really creation. But you understand what I mean. And what may happen then is that, let's say you go, you know what? Let's pick a name of, and it has happened to the band Earth Crisis lately and the band Fit for an Autopsy, who I don't really know. I know of Earth Crisis, of course. But let's say you are an unscrupulous prompter and you go, you know what? Pentagram. And you upload your music and use the same name as Pentagram. Just use the name Pentagram. Because that's not illegal. You upload the song And so listeners of Pentagram, there's probably 30, 40,000 monthly listeners, they go, oh, damn, a new Pentagram song. I mean, or pick many bands. Pick, many bands who have 100, 200,000 followers. People will listen to that song. And before Spotify can weed it out as being an AI fake or the wrong Pentagram, in theory, that song could have accrued 10, 20, 30, 40,000 listens before it's separated into its own category. And so if you do that with 100 different bands, you can't do it with huge bands, but you could certainly do it. You could pick, I'll stick with the Pentagram example, but you can put in whoever you want, medium favorite bands. And these could just be prompts from something else trying to capitalize on the name. Do you understand what I mean? Do you understand what I mean? Spotify doesn't have any regulations for, because it's an automated system, so it doesn't have any regulations or ability to understand or separate these things. Like I said, there should be something on Spotify that is able to detect something that has been generated with Suno or one of the AI generated music platforms. Like that the platform should be able to correspond or notify the uploading platform, and it will go, oh, I see you've used this to create this piece of music, therefore it has to have a red star beside it or something like this, or a red tick. So people scrolling through Spotify will go, oh, I see, that stupid lo-fi black metal, which is covers of Britney Spears, that's created by AI. But of course there's no incentive to do that, because it doesn't really help musicians, and it's surely, of course, going to be the staple in the years to come. And I don't know who Timbaland is, but I did watch a short clip of him using AI to finish a song he was making. If I'm not mistaken, he does sort of hip hop sort of stuff or something. And the AI completed. He was using this platform, and he was in the studio, and he was trying to figure out how to work things out. And he just, I guess, as a thought experiment, or more than a thought experiment, an experiment, he just used AI, and AI finished the song, and he was just like, fucking hell, that sounds better than the idea that I had. So are we going to start getting, like I've never heard a note of the music of Drake, but I just know that he's a popular, or The Weeknd or something like this. Are those artists going to just start using AI to make their new albums, or record labels, as we've seen recently? And I don't know if I discussed this on the podcast. There's been a sort of a rule passed in relation to some of the labels, God, that was a rather vague description, but saying, and I think, let's take Bon Jovi as an example. The man can't sing anymore, but that they could use an AI generated sample of his voice from 1986 for him to sing a new album. And he could use, it's still his voice, and they could sample his voice from back then and go, listen, John, sit this one out in the sidelines. We're going to make a new Bon Jovi album, somewhere between 89 and 90 style. In fact, probably you don't really need to play on it, and you don't really need to sing on it. You just have to prompt, and then we use your intellectual copyright, or we use your whatever you want to say. We're into the realm of that now. And I can see it starting to creep, shit runs downhill, but I can see it starting to creep into the metal scene. More and more stuff is popping up that seems like it's AI generated, and there just doesn't seem to be any means by which this automated system is willing to try and take amends of that. But what it also means is that a human simply cannot compete with this amount of content. It's not about the quality, it's about the content. I could probably use one of these platforms to create a fake live Primordial album. In fact, I could probably use it to create a new Primordial album, and use my voice from 1998, and this would then spike monthly listeners, or maybe even just make a song to keep spiking monthly listeners, which of course would help the band next year. Of course, fans of the band might be like, hey, that new last song was a bit crap, but who knows, maybe the technology is just around the well, we know it's just around the corner, we know it exists already, for maybe it to have make a new song that's better than one we might have made. The artistic implications for that are quite staggering. and not something I would ever feel I could stand behind ever defending on any level. But there are many musicians and people, I think, and especially ones who are making money from Spotify. Speaking of, isn't it interesting if you've been following the case of P. Diddy? Our boy P. Diddy has been accused of some really brutal things. He's still on Spotify. Interesting. But there's been a few black metal bands, Inferno War I can think of, who've been removed. Ye, or whatever his name is, Kanye, is still up there, despite him saying that he, loves Hitler and all that kind of stuff. If any of you saw him on the Alex Jones show, where clearly the guy's obviously having a manic episode or something like this. But isn't it interesting how artists like that are just left on Spotify, no problem, after doing pretty heinous things, but yet they will go after a metal band who have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4,000 listeners and get rid of them. But that's an aside. Some of you may remember the guy who went through the process and explained it and uploaded an AI-generated Depeche Mode song on YouTube. And I have to admit, after being relatively underwhelmed with the last Depeche Mode album, Memento Mori, I really loved the one before. It's a good record, don't get me wrong. The song that this guy created with AI would have been one of the standout tracks on that album. Of course, Depeche Mode is a big enough band to get it removed and taken down, but only as fast as other versions of other variations of songs got uploaded. I think we're headed for some very, very strange place indeed. And if someone thinks that they can ask, program ChatGPT to do this 100 times with 100 different bands. Funeral for a Friend, I don't know, that's popped into my head because of Fit for an Autopsy. And do it anonymously and upload 100 new songs in the style of 100 bands. And before all those 100 mistakes are weeded out by the automated system of Spotify, they could have generated themselves a neat and tidy $10,000. Now, I don't quite know how, if there's any problems with them getting paid. I presume not. I presume there's no legislation in place to stop this, because you're potentially having to somehow stop, via an automated system, other systems that are automated and prepped initially and prompted by a human. How do they all recognize each other and recognize the scam? That's the problem. And some of it won't be a scam. It's simply going to make it harder and harder as a musician to be noticed. And you can already see that there are AI versions out there of bands who have way more listeners than actual bands who are out there in the rehearsal room sweating and grafting and trying to learn their instruments and write songs. And what's going to happen is, as we move forward, we can already see that rock and metal is moving off the mainstream, or has been moving, becoming older, becoming an anachronism and an older style of music. And I think that that's one of the things that really I've noticed this summer. The festival culture around metal is strong, but as it grows older, the style, the resonant style of aggression and instruments and guitars and anger and all that kind of stuff becomes less and less relevant. And you can see the streams are going down. Everyone I speak to from labels are talking about there's less and less physical sales, and the monthly listeners. If you think of all the bands who sold hundreds of thousands of records, if not millions of records in the 90s, and then you go and you check and you go, oh, okay, such and such a death metal band has 40,000 listeners or 50,000 listeners. Of course, that's not enough to make them or the label really much income stream at all. And they aren't selling physical copy like they used to, because the new generation of people involved in the underground, younger people, they don't seem to be collecting vinyl the same way the vinyl was a big thing 10 years ago. And all, speaking to people in labels during the summer, and not just the underground labels, the bigger labels, they're all buzzing around trying to find bands like Iwar, Ivor, Wardruna, Heilung, this kind of style, this kind of variation style which is coming out of the metal scene. And whereas 10 years ago, people were looking at exciting new black and death metal bands from the underground scene as what was going to break through. And those bands, while consolidating, never really broke through by and large to a bigger audience. Even if you look at some of the bigger bands, Your Behemoths or Monomarths. They're still sitting, I think Behemoth sits at 450,000 monthly listeners. A Monomarth is near enough to 1 million, but none of them are able to compete with pop artists or mainstream artists at all. Maybe only Ghost is, and even still, Ghost numbers are not huge, but they're the exception and not the rule. So what's happening? It feels like the underground, the black and the death metal scene is aging now, and it's aging into a kind of place where what it wants to do is consolidate and not growth. If you're in a band now who've been going for 25, 30 years, the idea that you will break through into a young, an energetic, enthusiastic audience, of course you will to some degree, but it's really about consolidation. It's about saying, okay, we have some legacy, we can still go on tour. Think back to some of the tours that happened in the 90s and the early 2000s. I used to go to those No Mercy shows, and there were sometimes 2,000 or 3,000 people there to see Marduk, Deicide, Malevolent Curation, Grave, whoever else, Vader. Thousands of people, huge places, and you got the feeling that this was the culmination of that late 80s, early 90s death metal, and it felt young and exciting and fresh. Now, of course, not every kind of music can have that, and that's just the way things go. It happened in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s. And, by the 1990s, most traditional metal bands, like the Priests and the Maidens even, or the Saxons, they were in the doldrums in the 90s. And you just had to hunker down, consolidate, and they came back. But I'm not sure that things come back in a way like they did for those bands, because the physical sales are gone for the most part. So if you're in a band now who's getting festival fees of between like 6,000 and 7,000 and 12 or 13 or 14,000 for a show, it's all about consolidation, trying to keep hold of that status. And unfortunately, keeping a hold of that status means releasing a song on Spotify every 2 or 3 months. So you can see the circular argument. You can see the conundrums, the complications that come with that. Now, of course, if I say to somebody, X band was paid 10,000 for a festival, they're like, wow, 10,000. So every member got 2,500. That's not bad. And you go, no, not really. They made about 400 or 500 euro each. And they go like, what? Because from that 10,000, of course, you've got taxes. You've got artist commission, which usually sits at 19%. You've got a commission to the booking agent. You've got luggage, flights, all sorts of stuff to come out of that. And before you know it, you can have costs of 6,500, 7,500 out of that 10. Then you've got crew. You've got to pay for their flights. And believe me, flights have gone insane. And we were offered some connections with Primordial recently. Oh, do you want to connect from Frankfurt to Stockholm? And fly at a reasonable time. Oh, what's the price? 720 euro without luggage. 720 euro? What the fucking fuck? But anyway, you see the circular argument that's becoming here is that humans are kind of being gamed out of the process. And if you want to compete for these numbers, you're going to you realize you're going to be outgunned. Not for traditional metal. Look, traditional metal will be fine. Every time I have these arguments and these discussions, people say to me, why do you care so much? And I go, well, I'm just interested and fascinated by the music industry. I'm fascinated by it. I've always worked in and around it, or tried to. And I'm fascinated by numbers and by the whole analyzation of the statistics within the music industry. But whether metal goes back to the underground and we're going to, traipse across clubs in Europe playing to 100 to 200 people and go back to a place where we were, that doesn't fucking bother me, really. It's just hard for example, independent small labels to, finance their ability to exist without some physical sales. They won't be able to exist without some physical sales. The mail orders were the life's blood of most underground small labels. And you take away that because everybody's just streaming, and well, then you're going to just lose. You're going to lose the underground labels, and you will lose small venues. You'll lose, as I spoke before the other week, about why the social culture and environment surrounding rock music has been severed. You look at the disgust over the Oasis tickets, and Oasis were once upon a time a working class bunch of guys who played in working class venues, and the victory of pop culture and the hip hop culture is that the those bands and those people, well, they're not bands, but those artists, or whatever you want to call them, prompters, they never did that circuit. And so music is being seen and sold by Live Nation and Ticketmaster as a luxury event, a luxury item, something for the gram. You have to be there, a FOMO event. That is going to cost the same as people used to save up their money to go on fucking holidays for. And that's kind of how it's being sold to you. But Glenn, please get a drummer in or get someone to produce those songs. And the thing is, as much as we in the heavy metal scene or the underground scene can say we are completely insulated from mainstream trends, we aren't. We are downstream of some of them. And like I said, the legacy bands are now moving into a 20, 30 plus year career who were once, they've moved off that, that starting point of being young and exciting. It's really about consolidation. And the new generation of young people, they're certainly not resonating with rock and roll. And we discuss this all the time in the booking agency world, is how to make a configuration of bands that will bring 6, 7, 8, 900 people to a show is very difficult, if not impossible. Most of the configuration of bands that works, 400 is the max. And very often, if you don't configure all those bands together, and don't forget, when you go and see a bill which has 4 bands who have to fly and travel, that's 4 sets of 4 by flights, a tour bus and more petrol, more everything. And at 300-400 attendance, while good, in 2000, that was more like 1,800, 2,000 people. And it certainly is, like I said, I think this should be the kind of theme of this podcast, and that is you become a curator of your own legacy, a curator of what small patch of the earth you've managed to carve out for yourself within the scene, and that chartable growth like you once perhaps had 10, 15 years ago, it's just not really happening. So you stand or fall based on if you are able to curate that legacy properly. But people have found ways now to game the system. Like I said before, you've seen those bands, you've come across their videos on YouTube and you've gone, how does this band have 4 million views? And now it's kind of becoming clear, I think. We're like, well, somebody somewhere, some fanager or manager went, let's pay the money and get the bots. And the same with the Spotify bots. You've heard people say that they think most of the people arguing on Twitter are bots. How are we going to be able to morally make a separation? Or how are we going to be able to adjudicate this? The idea that a streaming platform service is going to be paying out money for bots listening to music made by AI to someone who's found a way of gaming the system. Perhaps it doesn't even need to be paid out to someone. In the future, that might be independent, platforms making money for people who, what they've done is they've basically set up 10 different businesses and have them all running off different platforms and just sit around preening and exfoliating themselves. I don't know how that's managed, but surely when I looked at this shitty band or shitty whatever it is prompt, which was lo-fi black metal doing covers of Barbie World and whatever it is, I mean, their monthly followers were more than somebody actually struggling trying to do the same thing in an Eastern country, standing there with a drummer and whatever. And it's depressing and despicable. But I just think we're, the tide, this kind of tide is going out, or whatever you want to say. And what comes rushing back in is going to, in the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to see a big shift in all of these things. And it's going to be difficult to know. Going to be very difficult to know. Anyway, I'm almost done. What am I supposed to do but sound my very tiny alarm bell? My friends, Agitators Anonymous, I'm Alan Averill. You can go over to patreon.com/Alan Averill for more podcasts, more random this and that. Go over to Nemthianga_Primordial for my dumb and docile adventures. And then Primordial_official for, the stuff to do with the band and all that kind of thing. I'm going to have some, maybe, after all these years, do some merch connected to the podcast. We'll see about that. Like I said, I ain't the world's greatest businessman, obviously, or else I'd have ChatGPT running an online hands-off empire. Anyway, what I might do is let's make a Heilung Wardruna style band instrumental which is based on Celtic mythology. Ka-ching, 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 ka-ching. Hire a girl in her underwear to jump around with maybe like some sort of skull on the top of her head. AI generate a cool video where we're all Celtic warriors round, on a round of fire or something, just dancing around a fire, and just make an Irish version of all of that stuff. Bang a drum, blow a tin whistle, whatever, and I can go over it and ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. Or maybe not, I'll just go outside and have a walk instead. My friends, Agitators Anonymous, over and out. By the way, that's my idea. I mentioned it first. Or really, when you think about it, maybe Danzig should do it. Or maybe someone else should do it for Danzig. The plot thickens. Until next week, my friends.